Happy holidays, everybody. Welcome to 2023. Mike Rutherford here sitting down with wrestling legend Al Snow to talk a little bit about his life in wrestling, what he's got going on these days. Al, happy 2023 to you and happy holidays.
Happy 2023 to you too.
I think people now, obviously any wrestling fan is familiar with you, your background. Now you're here in Louisville, Kentucky. You've been with OVW for a long time. I want to talk a little bit about you. What led you to this place right now? But before we do that, the people back here, the people in town, they love a good stroking of the ego here. How much do you love Louisville, Kentucky? How much have you enjoyed
honestly,
being here?
I honestly, from the moment that I moved down here to Louisville, and that was in the early 2000s, I love Louisville because it has character, it has personality, it has unique areas all over the city. You know, you go into the Highlands, it's a completely unique area, has its own vibe, as opposed to if you go into Old Louisville, that's got a completely different vibe. If you go to J-Town, or if you go to Middletown, and it's not just a nondescript city. It actually has a feeling and a personality in each of those, in all those neighborhoods around the town. So, and it's just big enough to where there's tons of stuff to do, but it's not so big that you gotta like plan your life around traffic. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So I've really liked living here. And at one point when I worked for Impact Wrestling, they required me to move to Nashville, it's a beautiful city, but you know, when I was given the opportunity to no longer be in the office down there and wasn't required to live in Nashville, I moved right back to Louisville, came right back here.
We've seen OVW boom with you here. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and better and better.
I hope so.
Now, as we flip the calendar to 2023, I'm assuming exciting things on the horizon for Ohio Valley Wrestling.
I think so, yes. I think that this is going to be finally the breakout year. And, you know, honestly, I really believe with some opportunities I can't really talk about right now at the moment, but those will manifest. And when they do, I think it's going to take OVW and Louisville, the area of Louisville itself, to a whole another level. It's going to, you know, give us an opportunity to expose OVW and Louisville and the fan base that's always been here to the entire world.
Let's talk about Al Snow.
Okay.
I know it may be hard for you to do, but
yeah,
let's talk about Al Snow a little bit. Anybody who's been involved with wrestling for as long as you have has to it has to be a love affair. It has to be something that has been, you know, with you for a long, long time. Was young Al Snow a little entertainer? When did you first fall in love with wrestling?
Well, I grew up in Ohio, and during a period of time when, you know, wrestling was very regional, you know, and so that people understand, like, professional wrestling had a national level back in the 30s, and then became regional. Then it became national again with the advent of television, and then it became regional again. And during that regional time was when I grew up, and it was in Ohio, and we had big time wrestling, and I was a fan right from the start as a child, of course. And then I was 14, and I decided that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a professional wrestler when I grew up, and pursued it, and I became a professional wrestler at 18 years old. I've been doing it ever since.
At 18?
Yeah.
How did that happen? How do you become a professional wrstler at 18? You graduate high school, you leave, or you just bounce and say, it's time?
I wish it would have been that simple. Back then, the professional wrestling business was much more closed, much more secular, and I've been asked that question before, and I always explain that it was easier to be a made man in the mafia than it was to become a wrestler. Really, you know, it was kind of like the Masons. You had to know one, or you had to be born into it, and it was never an easy process to convince somebody to break you in, so to speak, into the professional wrestling business, because it was kind of like an apprenticeship. You were now responsible for whoever's brought you in, their reputation. And so, you know, that meant that if you messed up, they messed up. If you got punished, they got punished, and it would affect their livelihood, the way they would feed their families. So they were very reticent, and were not willing to just let anybody in. So it took a lot of convincing and a lot of, you know, talking and just really selling myself until I was able to finally get somebody to believe that I could do it.
Who was that person? I mean, was there somebody who really, like, opened that door for you, who just allowed Al Snow to break into the wrestling community?
It wasn't that simple. The story I've told a couple times was I didn't, of course, it wasn't, this will be crazy for some people these days, but we didn't have the internet. We didn't have Google, So what I did as a kid was I would get the wrestling magazines, the old After magazines, they called them, and they would list, where the promotions, what cities they were around the states where they resided. So, like Crockett Promotions was in Charlotte, North Carolina. AWA was in, Minneapolis, Minnesota. WWF was in Stamford, Connecticut. And then I walked, because I wasn't old enough to have a car and have a license. I walked to the local library, and they had business white pages for all of those cities. And I'd go down and I'd find Crockett Promotions, and I'd write it down, and then I'd walk home. And then I would call the office once a month, which my parents were like livid, because that was when we had long distance charges. And I would try to convince them to let me be a professional wrestler. And a lot of times they'd just hang up on me, but then it got to the point, because I'd do it every month, like clockwork, they knew who I was. And sometimes they'd set the phone down and see how long it'd take for me to hang up, or sometimes they'd stay on and talk to me. And I got a hold of, when I was in my senior year of high school, I got a hold of Crockett Promotions, and I got in contact with Gene Anderson. And he had told me they were going to have a tryout like that October of that year. And this was 2 or 3 months prior. And I was just about to graduate high school. And I went, great. And he's like, it'll be $250, which back then was, that was a lot of money. And I was like, all right, I'll be there. And he was like, sure, kid, click. And at the same time, the Distributive Educational Club, it was called DECA. It was part of the vocational wing of the school. They ran like a fundraiser, and Dick Afflis, who was the promoter in Indianapolis, Dick the Bruiser, more known as, he ran the show. And one of the wrestlers, Jim Lancaster, was kind of going into semi-retirement, had been on the road for 10 or 15 years, and he lived just about an hour away from where I lived at the time in Lima, Ohio. And he gave him a business card because he was starting his own promotion, and to the teacher. And I found that out, so immediately I went and got in touch with the teacher, got the business card, called him up, and I met him at a McDonald's. Here's this man and I knew it was him. Had never met him, but I knew it was him. Just like 365 pounds, sitting in a booth at McDonald's and eating a hamburger. So I met him and had a conversation with him, and he basically just shut me down. And I told him, I said, well, I'm going to Charlotte for a tryout with the Andersons. He said, well, I worked there, make sure you tell him I said hi. I went, okay. That did nothing. So I went to Charlotte, North Carolina. I basically, now these days I sold my car so that I would have enough money to be able to afford a bus ticket. Now, take that in. Yeah. I could have just drove my car. It didn't occur to me at the time when I was 17. And now, as I've gotten older, I went, God, I was dumb. That was not smart. And I sold my car, and I took a Greyhound bus ride. It was a 24-hour bus ride. I'll never forget that. And if you want cruel and unusual punishment, stick somebody on a Greyhound bus, let me tell you. I can understand why that guy in Canada went crazy and attacked the passengers. And I went to Charlotte, and I took a 5-mile walk out to where the old Coliseum was. And there were probably 30 or 40 of us that started, and they literally tortured us for probably 3 or 4 hours, broke my nose, beat me up, and sent me home. And when I got back, Jim had told me to call him and let him know how things had went. Well, what had transpired was he was running some shows, and he had, at the time, there was a very popular, good-looking young guy that everybody wanted to use that worked for, it was Dick the Athilis's son-in-law, his name was Spike Huber, and he was a big draw in the Midwest. And Jim ran a show, wanted to book Spike Huber. It was agreed to. He was allowed to come. And then Dick sent him out to St. Louis for Sam Muchnick. So Jim thought, I'm going to get a crew of guys that I can control. And so he changed his mind and decided that he'd be willing to train me. And then it wasn't simple after that. You're like, oh, well, it's done.
Yeah.
Well, now we have to find a place to do it. So I reached out. I'd graduated high school. I reached out to our athletic director, asked him if we could use the wrestling mats. It was probably in December now of the year. And I said, can we use the wrestling mats? Because the wrestling season was on when they're done with practice. Oh, yeah, you can do that. So show up the first day. I didn't realize there had been a snowstorm. The school there was no school that day. So I walk around the building and I find a door that's open. I go in the building because it's right near where the gymnasium's at, and set off the alarm, apparently, the silent alarm, and police show up with guns drawn, screaming at me to get down on the floor. Well, suffice it to say, we couldn't practice there anymore because the athletic director got called at like 9 o'clock at night. So I found a community center and convinced the executive director of the community center that I would teach the youth how to wrestle, which I didn't know how to, if they would let us use the facilities to train there. So he did, and I had my first match in May 22nd of 1982 was the very first match I ever had in Springfield, Ohio. So
you had this dream. You grow up, you sacrifice things. Some of you didn't even really need to sacrifice. You make the sacrifices, you break in, you finally you get your first match. The early years, I think anybody who breaks into an industry will tell you, there's a moment, there are a few moments where you're like, is this really for me? You grew up loving this. Even in those early years, was it something that you maintained the love for, or was there a moment where you were like, well, maybe I made a mistake?
I always maintained the love, but and it was hard, because what some people don't understand about the entertainment industry, not just professional wrestling, but sporting athletics, music, acting, you name it. It's not like a regular employment, meaning you're not entitled to get paid, and that I think a lot of people enter into this world thinking that it's the same as if you work at, a steel mill or at Walmart, where you go into it as an employee and you've made an agreement that, hey, I'm going to come into your work, I'm going to perform this task, and you're going to pay me this much per each hour that I'm here. It doesn't work like that. And you're only worth what it is that will motivate people to come, as many people will come to see you, do your job. And at that time, my name wasn't even on the poster. I was either plus one other match or additional all-stars or other exciting bouts. So I always got the last share of whatever the gate was. And there were lots of nights like I didn't have money, to really eat. But that was why I invented the barbecue, which back then they didn't have microwaves in the gas stations, and not like they do now. Because I get excited, like Sheetz or Wawa or Buc-ee's. Oh my God, it's heaven for me because if they got I would have lived like a king back then if I knew gas stations had good food. They had these Stewart sandwiches that were cold. They were terrible. They were like 50 cents.
There you go.
Maybe some of them were 35. But they were disgusting and they were horrible cold. So I got a Boy Scout mess kit, which are basically 2 metal plates, and you have a clamp on them with a wing nut, and then I got some muffler tape, and I would strap that to the manifold of the car on the engine of the car, and then I'd stick the sandwich in there. And I'd drive down the road and I'd heat it up.
Lavish.
Well, and I learned you could do that also with Vienna sausages and Spam and other tasty treats.
So is there ever a moment you're doing this? I mean, you're heating up gas station food in your car.
Not at all.
There's never a moment where you're like, maybe this is
and now, when I look back, it really was, it was an awesome time. It really was, But I got that frustration, I think, around year 10 or 12, where I was like, all right, something's got to give, something's got to break. I mean, I gotta go to the next level, you know. And then that was where I got an opportunity to go to Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And through that opportunity, you know, I met, you know, I was seen by both WWF at the time, Vince McMahon, and WCW, Eric Bischoff. And literally both at the same time Eric asked me to come to Atlanta to do a dark match, is kind of like what we call a tryout match. And then, you know, literally picked up the phone the very next day, and Jim Ross had contacted me when they wanted me to come to Stanford. And the difference between the two companies was dramatic. I mean, it was crazy. You know, in the sense of, they asked me to come down to Atlanta. I was like, great, fly down to Atlanta. Nobody speaks to me when I land. I've got to find my way over to the CNN, to the hotel. I got to find out I have a room. I got to call their office finally at around 5 in the afternoon to say, where do I need to be the next day? They couldn't be bothered. Meanwhile, the very next week, I fly to LaGuardia. There's a guy at the base waiting at the end of the escalator with a sign for me, takes me out to a limo, puts me in the back seat, drives out to Stanford. I meet with, at the time, was J.J. Dillon, was the head of talent relations, and they give me a tour of all of Titan Towers. They take me over to the TV studios, give me a tour of everything, and then I meet with Vince for like 3 hours, and in his office, offers me a contract right then and there. And I'm like, well, you know, I've told Eric Bischoff I'd wait and, you know, and see what they have to offer. And he goes, you owe it to your family. Look at both. Let me know. But you know, after a couple weeks, I never heard from, you know, WCW, and the answer was pretty simple at that point. It was, you know, go to WWF, and the difference in the companies, the way that they handled things was amazing.
I got to ask you, talking about meeting with Vince McMahon. Keep in mind, we're on TV here.
Yes.
Best Vince McMahon story that is suitable for air. You can tell.
I got one.
Okay.
I've always been kind of ahead of the curve because I was getting canceled before cancel culture was a thing. So when my action figure first came out, Jakks Pacific had put a small, like, where you just popped a Barbie doll head off of it in the package. And I've never referred to head for anybody that's not out there, that's not familiar. You know, I was supposed to be schizophrenic and believe the head actually spoke to me, and I carry it around. It was a beautician's mannequin head that I interacted with as if it was real, like it was live. And so I'm in Philadelphia. We're going to do Raw, the television show, that night, and I'm at a gym, and the top 3 news stories on TV were in no particular order. And when I'm telling you, Mike, on every, like, ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, every affiliate there in Philadelphia was the mayoral proceedings, the mayor's race, the Bosnian peace process, and my action figure in Walmart had been banned. And the reason it had been banned was because a woman, and I think her name was Cheryl, and I only just found this out because I was doing the radio interview, and the DJ literally lived in Kennesaw, Georgia, near Kennesaw State University. He was attending college at the time, and she was a professor of all things of communications. She went into Walmart, saw my action figure, and without doing any homework or research or anything like that, just assumed that it was a female head, and wrote a letter to the Atlanta Constitution saying that, and I quote, that my action figure was a training manual for future spousal abusers. And so Walmart, the Atlanta Constitution, because wrestling was really popular, very mainstream, printed the letter. And then Walmart, in a panic, banned it. I'm still on my action figures number 5 on the banned list of items that they will not sell, that they feel are a threat to the community. And actually, pregnant Barbie's number 1. So such a Such a slut.
It's a great list.
I know. I think it's like 21 or 22. Now, you can still go to Walmart and buy a hunting rifle and a knife to dismember your victim, but you can't buy my action figure. The point of all the story is I walk in to the arena that day in Philadelphia, and Vince is down the hallway, and he's talking to one of the writers, Tommy Blodgett, and he turns and he sees me. His face lights up, and he's, "Al, what have you been up to, pal?" And I go, "Vince, I have no idea. Like, this caught me out of left field." And he just stopped, turned around, and walked right back and started having a conversation with the writer again, as if I didn't exist. Like, I stood there, like, what just happened? Like, if I go to you and I go, "Hey, Mike, how you been?" And you go, "I've been," and I just turn and walk away, like, I don't care. You know, I was like, who starts the conversation and then just walks off?
Unreal.
And so I said, "Well, I'm going to go to the locker room, Vince. If you want to come down and finish the conversation you just started, let me know. I'll be around all day." And never said another word to me.
Not one.
None. Just acted like I did not exist.
Wow. I mean, unbelievable.
Yeah, he's a fascinating man. He really
Fascinating
is.
is one word. That's a great story.
Yeah.
So your time in WWE/WWF, I think that's where you become mainstream. It's where a lot of people find out about you. Obviously any business relationship, any employment is going to have ups and downs.
Sure.
If we're talking about the ups, what's the highest high for you during that time of your life?
I just, people ask me that all the time, and I honestly, it's probably just the fact that I was able to do what I love to do, and just focus on that, and have an opportunity to really go out there and just, create moments for an audience. Everybody goes, "What, was there a favorite match? Was there a favorite moment?" I tell you, every time I walk through that curtain, no matter the size of the audience, it's probably one of the most awesome experiences you can ever have. I mean, there's no way that I can possibly quantify it in terms that somebody could relate to, other than imagine being a high level, like an NFL or an NBA or a Major League Baseball player, and the experience, the rush of not only playing in front of thousands of people, but you got the game-winning touchdown. You hit the game-winning basket. You hit a home run in the World Series, and you get to relive that every time you walk out there. And you get to be an athlete of that level. You also get to be a rock star. You get to be a superhero. You get to be all these things all at once. And there are thousands of people. Well, even when there's just hundreds, it's just an experience that you can't, and you get to control it. Like when you go out, you're the guy, you're the person who directs the ship, and if you get good at it, you can literally make thousands of people stand up. You can make them sit down. You can make them cry. You can make them scream. You can make them laugh. You can make them cheer, and you can make them do it when you want to, and it's an incredible experience.
So you go from a kid who has the cops called on you the first time you're trying to train,
right,
to a young professional driving around, heating up Spam on your car,
yeah,
and now you're in the pinnacle of the sport.
Right.
Is there a moment where you reflect back, where there's kind of a pinch me, where you're like, I did this. This was all
I do
worth
now. When you're in it, and I think probably relate because you're in a similar field. I mean, because you're only as good as the last thing you did. Sure. Especially in a place like WWE, the competition and the pressure and the stress is so high, and I don't think people realize just how really competitive it really is. That you're so focused on, I gotta keep going up to bat, and I gotta hit, the next swing has got to either be a home run or it's got to be a triple. We start hitting doubles and singles, people are going to start to, you know what I mean? And God help you if you strike out, or you walk. I mean, now they're really going to start to create a perception that you may not be able to deliver the goods anymore, And the further you go up, the more that pressure becomes. So when you're in it, you never really get a chance to sit back and reflect. And now when I'm, a little more distance and a little more time, I have a lot more perspective, and I'm very proud of what I did. And I'm just a kid that I tell people all the time, I try to encourage them to pursue their dreams because, and not take no for an answer, because I came from a town in the middle of nowhere and had no attachment to wrestling, had no direct into it, and was told by my family and friends and everybody, this is never going to happen, and I've been on every continent on the planet except for Antarctica. I've been in at least 42 different countries, and made my living doing this for the last 40 years. I've been, I've wrote a book about my memoirs and experiences. I've been in comic books, have action figures, video games, all because I decided to become a professional wrestler. And I've gotten, like this, I would not be sitting here today talking to you if it weren't for the fact that I made a decision to go do it.
Have you ever explored, this has been your dream since you were 14 years old.
Yeah.
When you get out of actually wrestling, you do Tough Enough, you do OVW. This has been your entire life almost.
Yeah.
What would Al Snow have been doing if it wasn't for professional wrestling?
I have
no idea?
I have no idea. I really don't. The two questions that are the hardest answer is, what would you do if you weren't a professional wrestler? And I'm like, I honestly have no idea. I don't know. I really don't. And the second one is, why did you want to do it in the first place? And I can tell you, I don't know. I knew that it was the thing that I wanted to do. And I've been blessed. I've been very lucky that I've been able to do it for as long as I've gotten to do it. So, and now I'm involved, I'm part owner of OVW and, trying to create a platform that allows, twofold, allows the next generation of talent to have a place, a real solid platform with standards and professionalism of teaching the skills to give them the best opportunities to take advantage of anything that comes their way to make a career and live their dreams. And then a platform that for people that have been on a higher platform, a much larger level, WWE or et cetera, to have a place, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when that opportunity is going to come to an end for them, to have a place to return, reinvent themselves, and potentially get another chance to get a second run in one of those areas again.
You've been here, we're talking about the boom of OVW, and certainly we're expecting bigger and better things in 2023. What are you most proud of from your time here with Ohio Valley Wrestling?
I think what I'm most proud of, honestly, is the talent, the wrestlers themselves, and the stories that we've been able to tell, and the emotional connection that we get from the audience when it culminates and we see the story come together. We've told so many really good and entertaining stories, which sounds kind of weird that you're using, but that's really what wrestling is. It's the art of physical storytelling within the context of a competitive situation, and we've been able to really tell some remarkable stories in the last few years, and they're just getting better.
Last thing,
Sure.
2023.
Yeah.
What are you hoping for? What are you hoping to avoid?
Well, what I'm hoping for is to just grow OVW that much more, really put OVW and honestly Louisville, because Louisville's had a tradition of professional wrestling from the 30s, from the Allen Athletic Club on, and I really want to make it a prominent center again for professional wrestling and sports entertainment. And what I want to avoid is to not to succeed, for us to fail. I want to just grow the audience, and I want, for as many people as possible from as many different places around the world to see the talent and the fan base that we have here.
Any personal resolutions?
Do
you do that?
No, I don't, not really. No. I think, I started a comedy act that I now do on the side. So, I'm going to continue to pursue that, and we'll see how that goes.
No cops called for training?
Not yet, no. No. And nobody's throwing vegetables while I'm on stage, so I assume that, they think it's okay.
Where can people see you do that?
I go around the country. In January 14th and 15th, I'm in San Diego and in Burbank, California. So I'm going out to, West Coast. And then in April, I'm going to go over to Washington, D.C. to a comedy club there. So they seem to enjoy it. So
there you go.
Yeah.
He's Al Snow. You know him. You love him. You may see him on a comedy act coming to Netflix pretty soon. Al, Thanks so much for spending some time with us. Happy 2023 to you.
Happy 2023 to you too. And thank you very much, Mike. I really appreciate the time.
Of course. All right.